penguins get back to Antarctica. I mean, there are all sorts of problems with that. Dennis?
You spoke about inerrancy, and I suppose that would be equated with literalists. Say something about the other end of the extreme, that group of people who aren't literalists. Who are they?
Well, you mean liberals?
Secular.
I mean, to me, there are several levels of understanding, inerrancy being the strictest, if you like. I think there's another school of, well, there's a school of thought, this comes out of Fuller Seminary in California mainly, called limited inerrancy. The Bible is inerrant in terms of anything having to do with faith or morals, that kind of thing, but not things that are scientifically demonstrable. And so it's partly inerrant and partly not. And Fuller's a conservative place, but they're trying to work through this problem. I would say beyond that, the next step down might be calling it authoritative, which is somewhat different than saying inerrant.
Right.
Bible is God's truth, but you know, I think a lot of people in mainstream churches, people here I'm sure, can say that, well, God works through things that maybe weren't literally what happened, but the point of creation, it isn't that the entire world was created in 6 literal 24-hour days. The moral point here is that God created the earth. And the details, that reflects the understanding of 2,000 to 3,000 years ago when modern science wasn't known, and but the moral point's still perfectly sound. So you have that, and then you get down into more liberal, where, well, it's an interesting book with some good, useful stories. Jesus had some good teachings and things, so we can use it as we like, or, you know, I mean, there's just a whole range of interpretations, and you could find any number of them espoused in different churches here in town, I think.
Back in the 60s or 70s, there came out a Jerusalem Bible, which I understood was Catholic. But I happened to read some of it, and what really struck me is that one of the Beatitudes is, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." And just that change of one word sends Nietzsche completely off the map. And that shows the importance of the use of words in translation.
Incidentally, the Jerusalem Bible is a really interesting breakthrough for Catholics. Until then, the standard thing for Catholics was, you want a Bible in English, you translate the Latin Vulgate. Jerusalem Bible is the first major translation for Catholics that went back to the original languages. So,
Well, and I had great respect for the Jerusalem Bible.
Yeah.
I'm not a theologian, so I couldn't tell whether it was Catholically
no, it's,
oriented, but it's a very noble effort.
it's well done. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, right now my church is going through what is referred to as the story. And do you know anything about that?
The what?
The story is what it's called.
The story?
Yeah. It seems to be somebody that has taken the Bible and condensed a good part of it into, well, what comes across like just reading a book. And with certain specific verses here and there to, you know, to keep the Bible in it, but it's more, well, just like a story. You know, just,
Well, there actually are many of those. That's been done for a long time. You pick I mean, there's so much long, tedious, dull stuff in the Bible that really doesn't tell you all that much that's useful to your daily life. And so they've cut out large chunks of that and sometimes rephrased to make it more accessible. I don't know the story, but I can just tell you there are many different things that do that. And they're popular. I mean, to make the Bible more accessible, that's an attractive thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked at a library in the 90s and had a large reference collection. And one of the things I have is a huge multi-volume set of the books of the Apocrypha. Are those all the ones that didn't make the final cut of biblical writing? I mean, it was a huge, it rivaled the Oxford English Dictionary for volume. And so I'm wondering, what was that exactly?
Well, what we call the Apocrypha, that's the stuff that they cut out at Jamnia. It's 7 books plus parts of 2 others. And it's relatively limited. some Protestant Bibles, the Catholic Bible just has it just part of the Bible, it's interspersed. Some Protestant Bibles include that as a separate section, but it's not terribly long as those things go. Not what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
I think you're talking about New Testament Apocrypha, which is not a defined thing. It's just kind of like everything else that didn't make it into the Bible, and that's huge.
Okay.
Go down to our library in Smith Hall and look up New Testament Apocrypha. There's a huge literature. And archaeologists keep digging up more and more of it. It expands. Professor Marecki in our department found a piece, a manuscript, somewhat fragmentary, but enough to get something out of it, buried behind some old things in a warehouse in a library in Berlin, a museum in Berlin. And he published it. He called it the Gospel of the Savior. He published it. I mean, stuff comes out, it's a big deal when it does, but it does. And no reason to think it won't keep doing it. So,
My interpretation of what happened 6,000 years ago was writing was invented, more or less concurrently, several different places.
okay.
Well, that makes more sense to me than the
Yeah.
literal interpretation of creations,
Yeah.
per se, was that humans invented something important 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, sure. Although I will say that I think before writing, there was a much stronger oral tradition than we could have today. Because there wasn't writing, people really learned it very carefully and accurately. You know, the Quran in Islam was not written down for a long time, but there's no debate about the text. Boy, people memorized it exactly. Still some people today can recite it.
I'm wondering if you have anything to say about Talmud, Mishnah, and commentaries.
Well, the Talmud, of course, is the first 5 books of the Bible, it's the most important part of the Bible to Judaism. The Mishnah is commentaries. You know, Talmud's the book of the law, right? Well, it's just like our secular laws. You've got a law, but what's it mean? And that's why we have a court system, to interpret the laws. And so that's what the Mishnah is. It's simply the rabbinical discussion of what this all means. And then at some point in history, it was kind of decided, okay, we've done that, it's over. So the Mishnah is an established text today. And if you get a Talmud, it's identified separately. But then, of course, as soon as the Mishnah is done, well, more interpretation is necessary. We haven't figured it all. I mean, some of the most profound interpretations come in the last century. I mean, look at what's happened to modern medicine. You want to talk about ethical issues of life and death, and I mean, this is huge. And so the commentary continues. Well, there was a second set of commentary called the Gemara, and the Talmud properly is the first round of commentary plus the second round, the Mishnah plus the Gemara, and the Gemara is simply a further elaboration on the Mishnah. And then if you get a modern Talmud, there are several other things in it that are kind of being accepted, the Rashi and stuff like that, kind of also important, but it's kind of not exactly absolutely defined today. It's really just kind of a little bit open. Should we cut off? We're supposed to get out of here at 1, I thought.
I was about to come up since I started this. I got that.
Could I ask one remaining question?
Okay.
Should those of us who belong to a faith community that uses the Bible, and we have a pastor, preacher, whatever, what should we ask him? Should we say, what method of interpretation do you use? And what would be the answer we want to hear from them?
And can we footnote you when we do that?
Don't you have credentials still? I'd turn around and say, what
Yes,
do
but
you
I
think?
don't want to be asked that question, and I can't be because I don't preach anymore.
Okay, since I started this, I guess I need to finish it. And what I have to tell you is how this talk came about. I went to the planning meeting in December with a couple of ideas, which didn't sell. I had no speakers for them. I still think they will be interested at some future point, but I won't bother you with them. But finally someone said, why don't you talk with Tim Miller? Anything he says will be worth hearing. And he has just fulfilled that in my mind. I hope yours.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to the meeting this afternoon?
That's good, thank you.
No. What kind of meeting is it?
Well, the old women's league.
Oh, you know, I can't go this afternoon. I take